The Reed and Barton Virtual Archive is a project created by the Old Colony History Museum with funding provided by Mass Humanities. These short videos were created for the Virtual Archive to offer a brief overview of the history of Reed and Barton. Reed and Barton developed from its humblest origins in 1824 in Taunton, Massachusetts, to become one of America's most successful manufacturers of metal tableware, flatware, metal accessories, and housewares. For almost 200 years, Reed and Barton helped satisfy eager consumers and define American manufacturing. There are four main eras in the history of Reed and Barton, as the company advanced from Britannia pewterware to electro-silver plate goods to sterling silverware, and finally into the modern era with a focus on flatware. This fourth video will explore Reed and Barton's activities after World War II until the final demise of the manufacturer in 2015. After World War II, Reed and Barton returned from war production work to making silver plate and sterling silver goods. There were still many customers willing to buy the sorts of things the company had been making before the war. But there was increasing pressure to find ways of connecting to the growing post-war middle class, which was younger and had tastes and interests that were not well satisfied by the available designs. Reed and Barton, along with every other manufacturer, had to find ways to appeal to these new customers. For a company so accustomed to manufacturing things that did not challenge prevailing tastes, this was not easy. Reed and Barton was especially clever in meeting that goal by realizing that sterling silver flatware was their best option for getting from their past into their future. Flatware wasn't exactly new territory for the company, which sold and produced silver plate and coined silver forks and spoons from early on. In the 1860s, Reed and Barton bought their flatware in raw form from Rogers and Brothers, and then engraved and silver-plated it. This was a common practice at the time for manufacturers who wanted to sell forks and spoons, but did not want to invest in the massive drop presses and expensive steel dies needed to make them. The first flatware made by Reed and Barton was the 1868 Roman medallion, a design that Henry Reed decided to patent, even though it was a variation of other similar Roman medallion flatware already for sale by other manufacturers. By 1870, there were over 2,500 flatware items in their inventory, offered in a wide variety of styles well suited to the tastes of the time. As Reed and Barton's railroad and hotel business increased, so did demand for silver-plated flatware. With more experience and more tooling, they could begin manufacturing flatware in Taunton, and with time the designs became ever more complex. George Braybrook was especially interested in improving the quality of the silver-plated flatware so that it would be more durable long-term in the high-use environments of trains and hotels. This is a patent for an innovation that added a small area of sterling silver onto the nickel-silver fork blank before it was formed and plated, creating thicker silver in the areas most likely to wear down through use. Adding sterling silver flatware in the late 1880s increased their output even more. Reed and Barton introduced 3 sterling silver patterns in 1890, and then continued to add new patterns every few years. These patterns grew to offer a style to match every conceivable taste. Some were remarkably refined, original, and artfully executed. Some were less so, but likely were more commercially successful as a result. As always, the company was careful to appeal to the eyes and wallets of the widest possible range of customers. After World War I, the popularity of the colonial revival style guaranteed the continued success of some of their older patterns. But increasing pressure to create designs more aligned with post-war interests, with more modern ideas about design, led to some interesting new patterns that were both artistically and financially successful. There was one sterling pattern that managed to straddle both worlds, looking old enough to satisfy conservative consumers, but also new enough to blend in with the more modern offerings. Pointed antique had actually been introduced in 1895. Reed and Barton neither created nor introduced this pattern. It was made by New York-based silver maker Dominick and Hoff, a company with roots going all the way back to the 1820s. With the death of H.B. Dominick in 1928, the company's assets, including all the steel tooling for pointed antique, were acquired by Reed and Barton. This was a smart acquisition, as pointed antique remained one of the best-selling patterns for more than 75 years. A completely new modern design was added to the line in 1930. Contempora, made in sterling silver, and also offered in silver plate sold as Candide, was introduced as a Dominican Hoff pattern. It is unclear if the design was in process in 1928 and acquired by Reed and Barton, or if it was developed by Reed and Barton and sold under the Dominican Hoff name, which still had currency with consumers. Contempora does not seem to have sold especially well, but today it is the most remembered of the modern flatware patterns Reed and Barton sold, because it was designed by Eliel Saarinen, the famous Finnish architect and founding director of the Cranbrook School in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Surviving drawings from 1930 show the development of hollowware to match the Contempora designs. It is unclear if Saarinen actually created these designs, or if in-house Reed and Barton designers proposed these pieces to augment the Saarinen-designed flatware. Either way, it does not seem to have been put into production. Reed and Barton continued introducing new patterns, exploring how to satisfy a growing market for modern design. And yet, it is interesting to see that this ad for the cotillion pattern from 1938 suggests other patterns a customer might also consider. 1936's modern-looking Jubilee is there, but it is sandwiched between pointed antique from 1895 and Francis I from 1907. Reed and Barton was following consumer interests, and that didn't create a clear path forward to any one endpoint. There are more examples of revival-style ornate patterns than there are modern ones. With the arrival of World War II, sterling silver flatware production paused, and the company refocused its output to support the war effort. After the war, all of the manufacturing and material know-how developed to advance silver plating methods and to form stainless steel offered an opportunity to seriously rethink the approach to designing and making flatware. But post-war consumers were more excited to resume what the war had interrupted than to venture into new design territory. Also, developing new patterns and manufacturing all of the required tooling to put those designs in production took a few years. As a result, post-war patterns mostly continued the revival styles and over-ornamented surfaces that look more like 1900 than they did 1950. Reed and Barton began to aggressively advertise their flatware, and to do so with an intentional effort to advance the idea that every bride should have new silver of her own, and that a good hostess should have her own silver, reflecting her sophisticated good taste. These ads also show that it was not important for a bride or hostess to have modern taste, as they feature exclusively revival-style patterns. The marketing efforts continued and developed well into the 1960s, growing to include television ads, new pattern launch events, and even naming competitions on college campuses throughout the United States. This became a sort of self-reinforcing loop, with all new patterns needing, above all requirements, to fit into this marketing scheme. The imagined user group was extremely focused, a middle-class woman in her early 20s who was getting married. But you can see a clear change of direction starting in 1952, when post-war design and manufacturing was solidly recovered from wartime efforts. The added decoration never went completely away, but a parallel effort to get somewhere new solidified and advanced. New patterns added through the 1950s and into the 1960s became ever more clearly modern, celebrating new forms and proportions more than applied ornaments. And this did not happen by chance. Designer John Prip joined Reed and Barton in 1957 as an artist-craftsman in residence, creating designs intended for mass-market production, but working independently from directives assigned to the rest of the design department. Prip was born in New York, but raised in Denmark, where his father's family had been silversmiths for 3 generations. In his own studio at the factory, Prip worked to bridge the divide between handmade craft and factory-made industry, and to bring the Danish modern style, which took America by storm in the 1950s, into the company's offerings. Many of the most celebrated items Reed and Barton produced were designed by Prip, who was especially adept at creating families of disparate objects, forks, knives, spoons, coffee and teapots, pitchers, which all shared a family resemblance. In 1961, Prip developed an enamel finish called colored glaze, which added bold colored surfaces to silver and was applied across product categories. Colored glaze was remarkably successful, creating over $40,000 in sales in just the first 3 weeks. Although Prip stayed at Reed and Barton for just over 3 years, his work came to define the company's output in the 1960s and influence its development of modern designs. Of everything Reed and Barton produced over its long and storied 200-year history, it is Prip's designs that are most represented in museum collections today, which certainly says something about his influence and success. The ultimate example of both the effort to arrive at a new approach to design and also Prip's accomplishments at Reed and Barton is the diamond pattern. In 1954, noted Italian architect Joe Ponti created a new design for Reed and Barton. The original prototypes for this design now live in the special collections at the RISD Library, and they show both how extraordinary the design was and also how inappropriate for Reed and Barton customers. It was impossible to put into manufacture in quantity as designed. After extensive alterations by John Prip, under the direction of design director Theodore Kayer, the flatware became better suited to both an American audience and to factory production. Diamond debuted at the Plaza Hotel in New York City in 1958 and became one of the best-selling patterns Reed and Barton offered. John Prip designed a coffee and tea set to match the flatware, which is a real high point for design, metalsmithing, and Reed and Barton. Because of the success of the diamond flatware and because of the marketing efforts which promoted it as a Joe Ponti design, the world generally considers this coffee and tea set as a Joe Ponti design, in spite of the fact that John Prip created it. In addition to expanding the production of sterling and plated silver flatware after the war, Reed and Barton was also able to use the technical advances in manufacturing with stainless steel that they had helped create during the war. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Reed and Barton pioneered the introduction of a wide range of stainless steel flatware. As usual, this was done in a dizzying range of styles intended to appeal to every possible customer. Some continued the modern aesthetic that Prip had introduced, some referenced or updated older revival styles that had been in the line for many decades. Even as the designs introduced in the later 1960s and 1970s began to more confidently reflect contemporary popular interests, the older revival styles continued to define what Reed and Barton was offering. And this chaos of styles is evident in ads from the time. Tree of Life, a sterling silver pattern introduced in 1973, marks the end of the company's great era of flatware. As with many manufacturers, Reed and Barton began to struggle in the 1970s. Overseas manufacturing made it ever less possible to sustain manufacturing in Taunton, Massachusetts. Add to that the increasing informality of entertaining, the growing preference for eating on the go, and the dominance of the fast food industry, and even a tableware company that first succeeded in the economic crisis of the late 1830s found itself on unstable footings. Another problem was the price of silver. In 1969, silver was worth under $2 an ounce. By 1974, it was up to well over $4. 1979 saw it go to $11, and then in 1980 to a staggering $49.45 an ounce, creating the silver panic of 1980. Even when the price per ounce of silver eventually settled down again, the days of inexpensive sterling silver tableware were over. Any company hoping to continue selling sterling silver tableware in any style would be struggling. During the 1980s and 1990s, Reed and Barton shifted from manufacturing to product development and distribution. The company began outsourcing manufacturing to vendors in Asia, and in the 1990s, Reed and Barton began distributing goods made by other companies, including Waterford and Royal Doulton. The sad last chapter of this once great company became one of creating giftware with licensed characters and company logos. Reed and Barton finally closed its doors in 2015, ending an extraordinary era of innovation, manufacturing, design, and sales. Since 2015, Reed and Barton has existed only as a brand name now owned by Lenox, and the 16-acre factory site in Taunton was purchased by Acuity Management with plans to redevelop the historic buildings. Reed and Barton thrived for almost 200 years, at its peak employing over 1,000 workers. From 1824 to 2015, the company helped define American metalsmithing and manufacturing, satisfying consumers, and defining American design.